This video features first a reading of the saga of the hero twins as it appears in the Popol Vuh, followed by a commentary on Maya conceptions of Xibalba, which is a place of fright or the underworld, death, as well as rebirth and revival, which is to say, defeat of death or the lords of the underworld.
Now we shall tell of the birth of Hunahpu and Xbalanque, having first given the account of the defeat of 7 macaw along with Sipacna and Cabracan here upon the earth. The tale of the father of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. We shall now name the name of the father of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. We shall retell it. We shall merely repeat the tale, the account of the engendering of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. But we shall tell only the half of it, the smallest part of the tale of their father, the deeds of 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu above Xibalba. This, therefore, is the account of they whose names are 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, for thus they are called. It was in the darkness, in the night, when 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu were born to Xpiacoc and Xmukin. Now this 1 Hunahpu had 2 children, both sons. 1 Bats was the name of his firstborn, and 1 Xuen was the name of his secondborn. The name of their mother was Xbaquialo. Thus she was called, the wife of 1 Hunahpu. But 7 Hunahpu had no wife. He was merely a companion, merely secondary. By his nature, he was like a servant to 1 Hunahpu. They were great thinkers, for great was their knowledge. They were seers here upon the face of the earth. They were good by their nature, and in their birth as well. They revealed their talents to 1 Bats and 1 Xuen, the sons of 1 Hunahpu. Thus 1 Bats and 1 Xuen became flautists and singers, writers and sculptors, jade workers and precious metalsmiths. As for 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, they would merely play dice and bowl every day. The 4 of them would pair off to oppose each other. When they gathered together to play in the bull court, the falcon would arrive to watch over them. This falcon was the messenger of Huracan, youngest thunderbolt and sudden thunderbolt. The face of the earth was not far for him, nor was Xibalba far for him. In an instant he could return again to the sky with Huracan. Thus they tarried here upon the earth. By then the mother of 1 Bats and 1 Xuen had died. Now it was on the path leading to Xibalba where they played bowl. Thus the lords of Xibalba, 1 Death and 7 Death, heard them. What is happening on the surface of the earth? They are just stomping about and shouting. May they be summoned here therefore. They shall come to play ball, and we shall defeat them. They have simply failed to honor us. They have neither honor nor respect. Certainly they act arrogantly here over our heads, said therefore all those of Xibalba. Then they whose names were 1 Death and 7 Death gathered all of their thoughts. These, therefore, were the great judges, all of them lords. Each was given his task and his dominion by 1 Death and 7 Death. These are the lords named Flying Scab and Gathered Blood. Their task is to sicken people in their blood. These, then, are the lords Pus Demon and Jaundice Demon. Their dominion is to swell people up until pus oozes from the skin of their legs, and the skin of their faces becomes yellow with jaundice, as it is said. Thus, this is the dominion of Pus Demon and Jaundice Demon. These, then, are the lords Bone Staff and Skull Staff, the staff bearers of Xibalba. Their staffs are merely bones. These staff bearers are they who skeletize people until they are truly bones and skulls. As a result, they would die having received only emaciated bones, bloated with starvation. These are they whose names are Bone Staff and Skull Staff. These, then, are the lords whose names are Sweeping's Demon and Stabbing's Demon. Their task is simply to overtake people if they abandon sweepings and trash in back or in front of their houses. These would be overtaken and stabbed by them until they fall face down upon the earth and die. This, therefore, is the dominion of sweeping's demon and stabbing's demon, as they are called. These, then, are they whose names are Lord, Wing, and Packstrap. Their dominion is the people who die on the road as a result of sudden death, as it is called. Blood would come to their mouths, and they would die vomiting blood. Each one has his task, the burden he carries on his shoulders. They would simply wear out the necks and the hearts of these people so that they die on the road. They would cause this to happen outside. When people go out walking, they would come upon them. This, then, is the dominion of Wing and Packstrap. These, therefore, gathered together their thoughts when 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu were persecuted and harassed. For the Xibalbans desired the gaming things of 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, their leathers, their yokes, their arm protectors, their headdresses, and their face masks, the finery of 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu. Now we shall tell of their journey to Xibalba. 1 Bats and 1 Shuen, the sons of 1 Hunahpu, remained behind. Their mother had died. Later, 1 Bats and 1 Shuen will be defeated by Hunahpu and Xbalanque. The summons of 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu to Xibalba. Then was the arrival of the messengers of 1 Death and 7 Death. Go, you war counselors, to summon 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu. Tell them when you arrive, thus say the lords, they must come, say the lords to you. They must come here to play ball with us, that we may be invigorated by them. Truly, we are amazed greatly at them. Thus they must come, say the lords. May they bring hither their implements, their yokes, their arm protectors, and their rubber ball as well. Thus say the lords. Tell them when you arrive here, the messengers were told. These messengers were the owls, arrow owl, one-leg owl, macaw owl, and skull owl. For so the messengers of Xibalba were called. This arrow owl was like the arrow, piercing. This one-legged owl merely had one leg, but there were his wings. This macaw owl had a red back, and there were also his wings. Now this skull owl only had a skull with no legs. There were merely wings. The burden of these 4 messengers was to be the war counselors. Thus they arrived there from Xibalba. They arrived suddenly, perching atop the ball court. 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu were playing ball at the court that was called Honor and Respect at Kartra when they came. The owls, therefore, alighted atop the ball court, where they delivered in order the words of 1 Death and 7 Death, Pus Demon and Jaundice Demon, Bone Staff and Skull Staff, Flying Scab and Gathered Blood, Sweeping's Demon and Stabbing's Demon, Wing and Packstrap, for these are the names of all the lords. Thus the owls repeated their words. Are these not the words of the lords 1 Death and 7 Death? Those are the words that they said, replied the owls. We shall surely be your companions. You shall bring all the gaming things, say the lords. Very well, but wait for us while we leave instructions behind with our mother, they said. Thus they went to their home to speak to their mother, for their father had died. We must surely go, our mother. The messengers of the Lord have just arrived to take us. They must come, we were told. Thus the summoners have spoken, but this, our rubber ball, shall remain behind, they said. Then they went to tie it up above the house. We will surely return to use it again. Until then, merely play the flute and sing, write and carve. In this way, 1 Bats and 1 Shuen were instructed. Thus, you shall warm our home, and you shall warm the heart of our grandmother. But their mother Shmukain wept bitterly. We must go, but we will not die. Do not grieve. said one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu as they left. The descent of one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu into Xibalba. Then went one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu, guided by the messengers as they descended along the path to Xibalba. They went down steep steps until they came out again upon the banks of turbulent river canyons. Trembling Canyon and Murmuring Canyon were the names of the canyons that they passed through. They also passed through turbulent rivers. They passed through Scorpion River, where there were innumerable scorpions, but they were not stung. Then they arrived at Blood River. They were able to pass through it because they did not drink from it. Then they arrived at Pus River, which was nothing but a river of pus. Neither were they defeated here, but simply passed through it as well. At length they arrived at a crossroads, and it was here, at the four crossing roads, that they were defeated. One was Red Road, and another was Black Road. White Road was one, while another was Yellow Road. Thus there were four roads. Now this the Black Road said, "Me, take me, for I am the Lord's road." Thus spoke the road. But it was there that they were defeated. They started then on the road to Xibalba. At last they arrived at the council place of the lords of Xibalba, and there again they were defeated. They who were seated first in order were mere effigies of carved wood, adorned by the Xibalbans. It was these, then, that they greeted. Morning one death, they said to the first effigy. Morning seven death, they said again to the carved wood. Thus they did not prevail. Instead, the lords of Xibalba roared with laughter. They merely roared with laughter, all the lords, because they had completely prevailed. In their hearts, they had defeated one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu. And after they had laughed, one death and seven death spoke. It is good that you have come. Tomorrow you shall put to use your yokes and your arm protectors, they were told. Sit down on our bench, they were told. But the bench that they were offered was nothing but a very hot stone, and they were burned when they sat on it. Truly they spun around on top of it. Neither did they find relief. Truly they leaped up when their seats were burned. Thus the Xibalbans laughed again. They laughed until their insides hurt and their chests became cramped from their laughter. All the lords of Xibalba grabbed themselves and rolled around in their laughter. Now just go to the house. Someone will come to deliver your torch and your cigars there at the sleeping place, they were told. Thus they arrived in the house of darkness. There was nothing but darkness inside that house. Then the Xibalbans gathered their thoughts. Tomorrow we will merely sacrifice them. They only have to make a mistake, and straight away they will die by means of our gaming things that we used to play ball, said the Xibalbans to each other, for their ball was merely a round blade. White Dagger was the name of the ball of Xibalba. Their ball was sharp. Shattered bones pierced through the ball of Xibalba. Thus, one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu entered into the house of darkness. At length, one came to give them their torch, which was already lit. It had been sent by one death and seven death, along with cigars for each of them, which had also already been lit. These, then, were sent by the lords to one Hunahpu and seven Hunahpu. They were seated cross-legged there in the darkness when the courier arrived to give to them their torch and their cigars. The torch was brightly burning when it arrived, and with it were lit each one of the cigars. These are to be returned at dawn. They are not to be used up. Instead, they are to be collected again intact. Thus say the lords to you, they were told. Therefore, they were defeated, for they used up the torch as well as the cigars that had been given to them. Xibalba is crowded with trials, for there are many kinds of trials there. The first of these is the house of darkness, where nothing but darkness exists within. The second is named Shivering House, for its interior is thick with frost. A howling wind clatters there. An icy wind whistles through its interior. The third is named Jaguar House, where there are nothing but jaguars inside. They bare their teeth, crowding one another, gnashing and snapping their teeth together. They are captive jaguars within the house. The fourth trial is named Bat House, for there are none but bats inside. In this house they squeak, they shriek as they fly about in the house, for they are captive bats and cannot come out. The fifth then is named Blade House, for there are only blades inside, row upon row of alternating blades that would clash and clatter there in the house. Thus there are many trials in Xibalba. 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu did not enter into them. These are merely the names of each of the houses of trial. Thus 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu came out and appeared before 1 Death and 7 Death. Where are my cigars and my torch that were given to you last night? They were asked. We finished them off, O Lord. Very well then. Now your day is at an end. You are to die. Thus they were lost. They were broken as well. Here your faces shall be hidden, for you are to be sacrificed, said 1 Death and 7 Death. Then they were sacrificed and buried. It was at the place named Crushing Bulcourt that they were buried. The head of 1 Hunahpu was cut off, while the rest of his body was buried with his younger brother. Place his head in the midst of the tree that is planted by the road, said 1 Death and 7 Death. Now, when they went to place his head in the midst of the tree bore fruit. The tree had never borne fruit until the head of 1 Hunahpu was placed in it. This was the tree that we now call the calabash. It is said to be the head of 1 Hunahpu. 1 Death and 7 Death marveled at the fruit of the tree, for its round fruit was everywhere. Neither could the head of 1 Hunahpu be seen clearly, for his face had become identical in appearance with the calabashes. This was seen by all Xibalba when they came to look at it. In their hearts, they perceived the greatness of the essence of that tree, for it was accomplished immediately when the head of 1 Hunahpu entered into its midst. Thus the Xibalbans spoke one to another. Let no one cut the fruit, nor enter beneath the tree, they said. Thus they restricted themselves. All the Xibalbans restrained themselves, for the head of 1 Hunahpu was no longer clear, having become identical with the fruit of the tree whose name is the calabash. Great is the account of it. Now a maiden heard of it. Thus we shall now tell of her arrival there. The maiden Lady Blood and the tree of 1 Hunahpu. This, therefore, is the account of a maiden, the daughter of the Lord named Gathered Blood. A maiden, the daughter of a lord, had heard of it. Gathered Blood was the name of her father, while the name of the maiden was Lady Blood. When she heard the account of the fruit of the tree as told by her father, she was amazed by the tale. Can I not come to know it by seeing the tree that has been spoken of? I heard that its fruit is truly delicious, she said. Thus she went alone beneath the tree that was planted at Crushing Bulcourt. Ah, what is the fruit of this tree? Is not the fruit borne by this tree delicious? I would not die. I would not be lost. Would it be heard if I were to pick one? Asked the maiden. Then spoke the skull there in the midst of the tree. What is it that you desire of this? It is merely a skull, a round thing placed in the branches of trees, said the head of Hunahpu, when it spoke to the maiden. You do not desire it, she was told. But I do desire it, said the maiden. Very well then, stretch out hither your right hand so that I may see it, said the skull. Very well, said the maiden. And so she stretched upward her right hand before the face of the skull. Then the skull squeezed out some of its saliva, directed toward the hand of the maiden. When she saw this, she immediately examined her hand, but the saliva from the skull was not in her hand. My saliva, my spittle, is merely a sign that I have given to you. This head of mine no longer functions, for it is merely a skull that cannot work. The head of a truly great lord has good flesh upon his face, but when he dies, the people become frightened because of his bones. In like manner, his son is like his saliva, his spittle. He is his essence. If his son becomes a lord or a sage or a master of speech, then nothing will have been lost. He will go on and once more become complete. The face of a lord will not be extinguished, nor will it be ruined. The warrior, the sage, the master of speech will remain in the form of his daughters and his sons. Thus may it be so, as I have done to you. Climb therefore up there to the face of the earth. You will not die, for you have entered into a promise. Thus be it so, said the skull of one Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu. Now in this they merely carried out the thoughts and words of Huracan, youngest thunderbolt and sudden thunderbolt. Thus the maiden returned again to her home, having been given many instructions. Straightway her children were created in her womb by the mere saliva. Thus was the creation of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Now, when the maiden had arrived at her home and 6 moons were completed, she was noticed by her father, Gathered Blood by name. The ascent of Lady Blood from Xibalba. Then the maiden was discovered by her father, for he saw that she was now with child. Thus all the lords, 1 death and 7 death, along with Gathered Blood, gathered their thoughts. This my daughter is with child, O lords. It is merely the result of her fornication, said Gathered Blood when he met with the lords. Very well then, question her about this, and when she doesn't tell, she will be sacrificed. She will go far away to be sacrificed. Very well, you lords, he replied. He therefore questioned his daughter. Who is responsible for the child that is in your womb, my daughter? He asked. I have no child, my father, she replied. I have not known the face of any man. Very well then, it is true that you are a fornicator. Sacrifice her, you were counselors. The 4 owls were told. Then bring back her heart inside a bowl, so that the lords may examine it this day. And so they went, carrying the bowl and lifting up the maiden in their talons. They took with them the white dagger, the instrument of her sacrifice. You will not succeed in killing me, you messengers, for this that is in my womb was merely created and is not the result of fornication. Rather, it is the result of my admiration for the head of one Hunahpu, which is at crushing Bolcourt. Thus, do not sacrifice me, you messengers, said the maiden when she spoke. For this that is in my womb was merely created and is not the result of fornication. But what shall we give as a substitute for your heart? For we were told by your father, bring hither her heart, so that the lords may examine it and be satisfied with its form. Bring hither the bowl quickly, and place her heart inside it. Were we not told this? Therefore, what will we put in the bowl? For above all else, we do not want you to die, said the messengers. Very well, the heart will not be theirs. At the same time, your homes will no longer be here. No longer will you lure people by force to their deaths. Only the true fornicator will be subject to 1 death and 7 deaths. Mere croton tree sap will be theirs henceforth. Thus be it so. It will be this that you shall burn before their faces. It will not be this, the heart, that you will burn before their faces. Thus be it so. Take what the tree produces, said the maiden. Then the red secretions of the tree were collected in the bowl. There it congealed and became round. The red tree, therefore, oozed forth the substitute for her heart. The sap of the red tree was thus like blood when it came out. It was the substitute for her blood. Thus, she collected the sap, the secretion of the red tree. Its surface became like bright red blood in the bowl when the maiden cut open the tree called the sacrifice red tree. She named this blood, and blood croton it is still called. There on the face of the earth you will be esteemed, for it is become yours. She said therefore to the owls, Very well then, you maiden, we shall go then upward to hide you. But first we shall give the substitute for your heart before the faces of the lords, said the messengers. And so they arrived before the faces of the lords, who were all awaiting them expectantly. Was it not successful? Asked one death. It was successful, O lords. This is surely her heart, here in the bottom of the bowl. Very well, I would see it therefore, said one death. Then he lifted it up with his fingers, dripping with blood from its surface. It was bright red with blood. Stir well the face of the fire, and place it over the fire, said one death. Then they dried it over the fire, while the Xibalban savored its fragrance. They all rose up to lean over it, for truly delicious was the smell of the blood to them. Now, while they were bent over, the owls went to guide the maiden up to the hole leading above the earth. Then the guides returned back down again. Thus the lords of Xibalba were defeated, for the maiden had tricked them all. Lady Blood and the miracle of the maze. This, therefore, is the mother of 1 Bats and 1 Chuen. Then arrived the woman, Lady Blood by name, who came to the mother of 1 Bats and 1 Chuen. Her children were still in her womb. However, it wasn't long before the birth of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. So then the woman came to the grandmother. She said to the grandmother, I have come, thou lady. She said when she arrived there with the grandmother, I am thy daughter-in-law and thy child, thou lady. From where have you come? Did they not die in Xibalba? Only these 2 are left as their sign and their word. 1 Bats and 1 Chuen are their names. If you see that you have come, go back the same way. The maiden was told by the grandmother. But it is true that I am thy daughter-in-law. These are surely his. These that I am carrying belong to 1 Hunahpu. 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu are alive. They are not dead. That which they have done is merely a manifestation of their light, thou mother-in-law. Thus you shall see it. You shall see his face in these that I am carrying, she told the grandmother. Now 1 Bats and 1 Chuen gloried in these things. Only the flute and song did they do. Only writing and carving was their work every day. And so they comforted the heart of the grandmother. Thus the grandmother spoke to her, I do not want you. You are not my daughter-in-law. It is merely the result of your fornication that is in your womb. You are a deceiver. My children that you spoke of have died. The grandmother said again, They are truly his, I say to you. Very well then, I hear you that you are my daughter-in-law, the maiden was told. Go then to get food that these may eat. Go and harvest a great netful of maize, and return with it. Then you will surely be my daughter-in-law, just as you have said. Very well, she replied. Then she went to the maize field. that belonged to one Bats and one Shuen, along the path that had been cleared by them. The maiden thus started out and arrived there at the maize field. But there was only a single ear of maize in the field. There was not even one or two or three more. Although there was maize there, it was but a single ear that had been produced. Then the heart of the maiden sank. See, I am a sinner. I am a debtor. Where shall I obtain the netful of food that I asked for? She asked. Thus she called upon the guardians of the food. Come, arise. Come, stand up, Lady of the Day To, and Lady of the Day Canil, Lady Cacao, and Lady of the Day Tsi. You, the guardians of the food of one Bats and one Shuen, said the maiden. Then she took hold of the corn silk atop the ear of ripe maize, and pulled it upward. She did not pick the ear of maize, but it multiplied there in the net until the great net overflowed. Then, when the maiden returned, the animals carried the net for her as she returned. But when she arrived and saw her grandmother, they gave back her pack frame, and she perspired as if she had carried it. Now when the grandmother saw the food, the great netful, she said, Where did you come by this food? From where was it stolen? I will surely go to see if you have finished off the maize plant and brought it all here, said the grandmother. Thus she went to see the maize plant, but there was a single ear of maize still on the maize plant, and it was clear where the net had been placed beneath it. The grandmother thus rushed back to her home and said to the maiden, This is but a sign that you are in truth my daughter-in-law. I will surely watch your deeds, for they that are to be my grandchildren are enchanted already, the maiden was told. Hunahpu and Xbalanque in the house of the grandmother. Now we shall relate the tale of the birth of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. This, therefore, is the account of their birth that we shall tell. When the day arrived, the maiden Lady Blood gave birth. The grandmother did not see it when they were born, for these two arose suddenly. Hunahpu and Xbalanque were their names. They arose in the mountains, but when they were taken into the house, they did not sleep. Take them away and abandon them, for truly shrill are their mouths, said the grandmother. Thus they were placed on an anthill, and there they slept blissfully. Then they were taken out again and placed on a thorn bush. This was done by one Bats and one Shuen, for they would have had them die there, on the anthill and on the thorn bush. They wanted this because of the treachery and jealousy of one Bats and one Shuen. Thus, at first, their younger brothers were not accepted in the house. They were not known. Therefore, they just grew up in the mountains. Now, one Bats and one Shuen were great flautists and singers. They had grown in greatness. They had passed through great affliction and misfortune, and thus they had become great. They were sages. They were not only flautists and singers, but they had also become writers and carvers. Everything they did was successful for them, for they knew of the circumstances of their birth, and certainly they were ingenious. They were the substitutes for their father, who had gone to Xibalba and had died. Thus, one Bats and one Shuen were great sages. In their hearts, they knew everything from the first, even before their younger brothers were created. But nothing ever came of these enchanted abilities because of their envy. The abuses born in their hearts merely fell upon their own backs, and nothing came of them. Thus, they were ignored by Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who went out every day to hunt with their blowguns. They were not loved by their grandmother, nor by one Bats and one Shuen, nor were they given any food. When meals were prepared for them, one Bats and one Shuen would eat it all before they returned, but they did not become enraged or angry. They tolerated it, for they knew their own nature, and this was a light by which they could see. Thus, when they returned each day, one Bats and one Shuen would take away their birds and eat them. They did not give anything to the twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque. One Bats and one Shuen merely played the flute and sang. Then, one day, Hunapu and Xbalanque returned without bringing any birds. The grandmother was enraged because of this. "What is the reason that you have not brought any more birds?" Hunapu and Xbalanque were asked. "This is why, our grandmother. Our birds are just stuck up in the top of the trees," they said. "There is no way to climb to the top of the tree to reach them, our grandmother. Therefore, we would like our older brothers to go with us to bring down the birds," they said. "Very well," said their older brothers. "We will go with you at dawn." Thus, they were defeated. The two of them had planned for the defeat of one Bats and one Shuen. We shall merely overturn their nature. This is the essence of our words. Thus be it so, for great is the affliction that they have caused us. If it had been according to their desires, we, their younger brothers, would have died and been lost. In their hearts, we are looked upon as slaves, as if we worked for them. Instead, we shall make of them an example, they said one to another. Thus they went there, below the tree whose name is Yellow Tree, in company with their older brothers. As they went, they began to shoot with their blowguns, for there were innumerable birds in the top of the tree singing riotously. Their older brothers marveled at this when they saw the birds, but not one of these birds that they saw fell down beneath the tree. "Our birds do not fall down here. Just go and bring them down," they said to their older brothers. "Very well," they said, and they climbed up to the top of the tree. But the tree began to grow larger. It swelled in size. Thus, when they wanted to come back down, one Bats and one Shuen couldn't climb down from the top of the tree. They therefore called down from the top of the tree, "What can we say, our younger brothers? Take pity on us. This tree is truly frightening to see. Our younger brothers," they called down from the top of the tree. Thus Hunapu and Xbalanque called back to them, "Loosen your loincloths and retie the long end below your bellies. Pull out the tail end behind you. Then you will be able to walk freely," they were told by their younger brothers. "Fine," they said. And so they pulled out the ends of their loincloths, and these immediately became tails. They appeared just like spider monkeys. Thus they went up into the tops of the trees, there in the small mountains and the great mountains. They went out into the forests, howling and chattering loudly in the branches of the trees. Thus was the defeat of one Bats and one Shuen at the hands of Hunapu and Xbalanque. It was merely by their enchantments that it was done. Now, when they arrived back at their home, they spoke with their grandmother and mother. "Our grandmother, something has happened to our older brothers. Their faces have changed. They go about like animals now," they said. "If you have done something to your older brothers, you will cause me misery and anguish. Let this not be what you have done to your older brothers, my grandsons," said the grandmother to Hunapu and Xbalanque. They replied then to their grandmother, "Do not grieve, our grandmother. You shall see again the faces of our older brothers. They will come back. But this is a test for you, our grandmother. Please do not laugh, for we will test their fate," they said. Thus they began to play the flute. They played Hunapu Spider Monkey on the flute. The fall of one Bats and one Shuen. Then they began to sing, to play the flute, and to play the drum. And when they had taken up their flute and their drum, the grandmother sat down with them as well. Thus they played the flute, calling them with the music. In song they called out their names, with the music whose name is Hunapu Spider Monkey. Then arrived one Bats and one Shuen, dancing as they came. But when the grandmother looked at them, she saw their ugly faces and laughed, for she could not contain her laughter. Therefore they immediately went away. Their faces could not be seen any more, for they had gone back into the forest. "What now will you do, our grandmother? We shall try it 4 times in all. Only 3 times more we shall call them with flute music and song. But you must truly contain your laughter when we try it again," said Hunapu and Xbalanque. Then they played the flute again, and again they came dancing in the middle of the house patio. Animatedly, they did it, tempting their grandmother to laughter. Thus, immediately, the grandmother began to laugh again, for the faces of the spider monkeys were truly funny. They were paunchy and naked below their chests. And when they came, she laughed a great deal, which made them depart again into the mountains. Surely, what more can we do, our grandmother? This third time we shall try it again, said Hunapu and Xbalanque. Thus they played the flute again, and again they came dancing. But this time the grandmother was able to contain well her laughter. They therefore scampered on the wall. Their mouths were very red, and their faces were foolish. Their mouths were puckered and bushy. Their faces were silly, and they snorted at them. Now, when she saw this, the grandmother again burst out laughing. Never again were their faces seen because of the laughter of their grandmother. But this once more, our grandmother, we shall call upon them. Thus, for the fourth time, they played their flutes again, but this time they did not come back. Instead, they remained out in the forest. Thus they spoke to their grandmother. We tried, our grandmother, and at first they came back. We have tried to call them back again. But do not grieve. We are your grandsons, and we are here. Just love our mother, O grandmother. Our older brothers will be remembered. Thus be it so. They were given names and also given titles. One Bats and one Shuen shall be called upon, said Hunapu and Xbalanque. And since that time, they have been called upon by the flautists and the singers. The ancient ones also called upon them, they who were the writers and the carvers. A long time ago, they became animals. They became spider monkeys because of their pride, for they had abused their younger brothers according to the dictates of their hearts. Thus, they were ruined. One Bats and one Shuen were lost, becoming animals. Thus, their community and their home is now among the flautists and the singers. For great were their accomplishments when they dwelt with their grandmother and their mother, Hunapu and Xbalanque, in the maize field. Then they began again to accomplish their deeds, to manifest themselves before the face of their grandmother and before the face of their mother. First, they worked the maize field. We are going to farm the maize field, our grandmother and our mother, they said. We are the substitutes for our older brothers, said Hunapu and Xbalanque. Thus, they took up their axes and their hoes, carrying them on their shoulders. Each of them also shouldered his blowgun and departed their home, having first left instructions with their grandmother to bring their food. At midday, come to give us our food, grandmother, they said. Very well then, my grandsons, said their grandmother. Then they arrived there to farm the maize field. They merely stuck the hoe into the ground, and it truly began to plow the earth. All by itself, the hoe did the plowing for them. As for axe, they just stuck it into the fork of a tree, and by its own strength it would fell it. Thus, the one axe chopped and felled all the trees and bushes, feverishly working to cut down the trees all by itself. Now this, the hoe, would break up countless stalks and briars. Just the one hoe would clear countless mountains, both small and great, as it went. Then they gave instructions to an animal, Turtle Dove by name. Hunapu and Xbalanque placed it atop a great stump and spoke to it. When you see our grandmother coming to bring our food, immediately cry out that she has arrived. Then we will take up the hoe and the axe. Very well, said the Turtle Dove. Thus they merely hunted with their blowguns. They didn't truly farm the maize. And when the Turtle Dove cried out, they came quickly, the one taking up the hoe, while the other one took up the axe. They would then put field debris on their heads and rub dirt on their hands. The one would dirty his face as if he had truly farmed the maize field, while the other one would scatter wood chips on his head as if he had truly been cutting down trees. In this way they were seen by the grandmother, and thus they were given to eat. They did not truly farm the maize, and so it was unmerited that she went to give them their food. And when they returned home, they would say, "We are truly tired, our grandmother," and they would rub and stretch their legs and arms in front of their grandmother to deceive her. But on the second day, they arrived at the maize field to find that all the trees and bushes had been raised up again. All the stalks and briars had again fastened themselves together. "Who is playing tricks on us?" they asked, therefore. Now it was all the animals, both great and small, that had done it. The puma and the jaguar, the deer and the rabbit, the fox and the coyote, the peccary and the coati, the small birds and the great birds. These had done it. In a single night they did it. Thus they began again to farm the maize. Again the earth was broken up. The trees were cut down. There they gathered their thoughts over by the cut trees and the broken ground. "We will just watch over our maize field tonight, and thus we will discover whatever it was that has done this," they said when they gathered together their thoughts. So when they returned to the house, they said, "Someone perhaps has been playing tricks on us, our grandmother. When we arrived a while ago at our maize field, we found that it had become a great field of grass and a great forest once again," they said to their grandmother and their mother. "Therefore we shall go back and watch over it by night, for it is not good what has been done to us," they said. Thus they concealed themselves. They went out again to cut down the trees, and then they hid themselves there, taking cover. At length all the animals gathered together, coming together as one. All the small and great animals arrived in the very heart of the night, chattering as they came, and this was their speech. "Arise, trees! Arise, bushes!" they said when they came. Thus they congregated beneath the trees and the bushes, emerging where they could be seen before their faces. The first of these were the puma and the jaguar. The boys wanted to grab them, but they would not give themselves up. Then emerged the deer and the rabbit. They grabbed them by their tails, but these just broke off, leaving the tail of the deer behind in their hands along with the tail of the rabbit. Thus they still have shortened tails. Neither would these give themselves up. The fox or the coyote, the peccary or the coati, all the animals just passed on by in front of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Thus their hearts were troubled because they weren't able to catch any of them. But one more came along behind all the rest. He scurried when he came, and they netted him. They snared the rat in a net. They caught him and squeezed him behind the head. According to their desire, they strangled him and burned his tail over a fire. Because they did this to the tail of the rat, their tails still do not have hair on them, and their eyes are the way they are because the boys, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, strangled him. "I must not die by your hands. Your task is not to be maize farmers." "But there is something that is yours," said the rat. "Where is that which is ours? Speak then," the boys said to the rat. "Will you first let me go?" asked the rat. "My word is here in my belly. I will tell it to you, if you first give me a little food." "We will give you your food later, but tell us first," he was told. "Very well then. It is what belonged to your fathers, 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu by name, who died in Xibalba. They left behind their gaming things hanging above the house, their yokes, their arm protectors, and their rubber ball as well. Your grandmother did not show this to you, for it was because of them that your fathers died." "Is it not true? Do you truly know this?" the boys asked the rat. Thus they rejoiced in their hearts when they heard from the rat the news about the rubber ball. This therefore was given to the rat as his food: grains of maize, squash seeds, chili peppers, beans, pataste, and cacao. These then are yours. If anything has been swept out with the trash and has become exposed, then it is yours. You shall gnaw on it," said Hunahpu and Xbalanque to the rat. "Very well then, boys, but what will I say if your grandmother sees you?" he asked. "Don't be disheartened," they said to the rat. We are here. We know what to say to our grandmother. We will lift you up onto the corner of the house to fetch them. Straight away you will go up where the things are hanging. We will be able to see it in the rafters of the house, reflected in our sauce. Thus, Hunapu and Xbalanque gathered their thoughts and instructed him all night. And when it was truly midday, they arrived. Hunapu and Xbalanque discovered the gaming things. The rat they carried could not be seen clearly when they arrived. While one went into the house, the other went around to the corner of the house and immediately lifted up the rat. Then they asked their mother for their food. "Just prepare for us a bite to eat," they said. "We desire chili sauce, our grandmother." Thus their bite was prepared and a plate of sauce was placed before them. But this was just a trick. They were playing on their grandmother and their mother. They drained the water jug dry. "We are truly thirsty. Bring us something to drink," they said to their grandmother. "All right," she replied. Thus she left, leaving them behind to eat. But it was not true that they were hungry. It was merely a deception so that they could see the rat reflected in their chili sauce. There the rat was, behind the rubber ball, where it hung above the house. This they saw reflected in their chili sauce. Then they sent forth a mosquito. The mosquito is an insect similar to a small biting fly. It went to the river and pierced the front of the grandmother's jug. Thus the water that she had raised leaked out from the front of the jug. Try as she might, the face of the jug would not be sealed. "What is our grandmother doing?" "We are gasping for water. We are parched with thirst," they said to their mother. Thus they sent her away. Then the rat clawed at the ropes that held the rubber ball from the thatched roof above the house until it fell. Along with the yokes, the arm protectors, and the leathers, they carried them away and hid them along the road leading to the ball court. Then they went back to where their grandmother was, at the river, and there they found their grandmother and mother busily trying to seal the face of the jug. Thus they arrived at the river, each carrying his blowgun. "What have you been doing?" "Our hearts became weary, so we came," they said. "Look at the front of my jug. It cannot be sealed off," replied their grandmother. Immediately then they sealed it, and together they returned once more, leading the way before their grandmother. Thus was the discovery of this rubber ball. The summons of Hunapu and Xbalanque to Xibalba. And so they went rejoicing as ball players to the ball court. For a long time they played ball there, alone, sweeping clear the ball court of their father. Then the lords of Xibalba heard it. "Someone has begun to play again over our heads. Have they no shame, stomping about up there? Did not one Hunapu and 7 Hunapu die when they desired to puff themselves up before us? Go then to summon them here once again," said 1 Death and 7 Death, along with all the lords. "Summon them here," they said to their messengers. "Tell them they must come," say the lords. "Here we shall play ball with them." "In 7 days we will play," say the lords. "Tell them this when you arrive there," the messengers were told. Thus they came along the great cleared pathway, the road that led to the home of the boys. The messengers pursued them into the home of the grandmother, but the boys were still playing ball when the messengers of Xibalba arrived. "The lords say they must surely come," said the messengers of Xibalba. Then the messengers of Xibalba set the date. "In 7 days they will be expected." Such was the word left with Shmukin. "Very well then," replied the grandmother. "They shall go as summoned, you messengers." Thus the messengers returned again, leaving the grandmother heartbroken. "How shall I tell my grandsons of their summons? Were these not truly from Xibalba? They are just like the messengers who arrived in the past, when their fathers went away to die," said the grandmother. Thus She wept bitterly in the house alone. Then a louse fell down on her. It itched, so she picked it up and put it in her hand. The louse scuttled as it went along. "My grandchild," she asked the louse, "would you like me to send you to summon my grandsons at the ball court?" Thus he left as a summoner with this message: "Messengers have arrived with your grandmother, saying that you are to come. The messengers of Xibalba declare, in 7 days you are to come, says your grandmother." Such was the message given to the louse, and so he went scuttling along the way. Now, sitting in the road was a youthful toad by the name of Tamasul. "Where are you going?" asked the toad of the louse. "I am going to give the boys a message that is in my belly," said the louse to Tamasul. "Very well then, but I see that you are not going very fast," the toad said to the louse. "Wouldn't you like me to swallow you? Then you would see how fast I could go. We would get there quickly." "Very well," said the louse to the toad. Thus he was licked up by the toad, who went hopping along his way. But he did not go fast. Presently he was met by a great snake, whose name was White Life. "Where are you going, boy Tamasul?" asked White Life. "I am a messenger with a message in my belly," said the toad to the snake. "But I see that you aren't going very fast." "Perhaps I would arrive there more quickly," said the snake to the toad. "Go right ahead," he was told. Thus the toad was swallowed up by White Life. The snake then received his food, and they still swallow toads today. Now this snake went quickly along his way. Then again the snake was met by the falcon, a great bird, and the snake was swallowed by the falcon. Then he arrived atop the bull court. Thus the hawk received his food, so that he still eats snakes in the mountains. When the falcon arrived, he alighted atop the edge of the bull court, while Hunahpu and Xbalanque were rejoicing and playing ball. Then the falcon cried out. "Wacko, wacko," was the cry of the falcon. "What is that which is crying out?" "To our blowguns," they said. Hunahpu and Xbalanque received the summons to Xibalba. So then they shot the falcon. The pellet from the blowgun buried itself straight into his eye, knocking him down. Thus he fell, and they went out to grab him and question him. "Why have you come?" they asked the falcon. "I have a message in my belly, but surely you must first cure my eye, and then I will tell it," said the falcon. "Very well then," they replied. So they took off a little of the surface of the rubber ball and put it in the face of the falcon. This they called sliced rubber. Immediately he was cured by them, making good again the sight of the falcon. "Tell it then," they said to the falcon. Thus he vomited the great snake. "Speak," they said again to the snake. "All right," he replied. And so he vomited the toad. "What is your errand? Speak," the toad was told. "My message is here in my belly," said again the toad. Then he tried to throw up, but he did not vomit. His mouth just drooled. He tried, but nothing did he vomit. Thus the boys wished to beat him. "You are a deceiver," he was told. Then they squashed his rear end with their feet, crushing the bones of his backside with their feet. Again he tried, but he just salivated at the mouth. So they pried open the mouth of the toad. It was pried open wide by the boys. They searched in his mouth and found that the louse was merely stuck in front of the toad's teeth. He was just in his mouth. He hadn't really been swallowed. It was merely as if he had been swallowed. Thus, the toad was defeated. As a result, it is not obvious what food was given to him. He could not go fast. Thus, he merely became spoil for the snake. "Speak," the louse was told. Thus he spoke his word. "The grandmother says to you boys, go and summon them. Messengers have arrived from Xibalba, the messengers of 1 death and 7 death. In 7 days they will come here to play ball with us. They must bring their gaming things, the rubber ball, yokes, arm protectors, and leathers. They will liven up this place, say the Lord. This is their word that has come, says your grandmother. Thus, you must come, the grandmother truly says. Your grandmother weeps. She calls out that you must come. Is it not true? They asked in their hearts when they heard this, and immediately they returned to advise their grandmother. The descent of Hunahpu and Xbalanque into Xibalba. Surely we must go, our grandmother, but first we will advise you. This is the sign of our word that we will leave behind. Each of us shall first plant an ear of unripe maize in the center of the house. If they dry up, this is a sign of our death. They have died, you will say, when they dry up. If then they sprout again, they are alive, you will say, our grandmother and our mother. This is the sign of our word that is left with you, they said. Thus, Hunahpu planted one, and Xbalanque planted another in the house. They did not plant them in the mountains or in fertile ground. It was merely in dry ground, in the middle of the interior of their home, that they planted them. Then they left, each with his blowgun, and descended to Xibalba. They quickly went down the steps, passing through various river canyons. They passed through the midst of many birds. Phlox was the name of the birds. And again they passed over Puz River and Blood River. In their hearts, the Xibalbans had intended these as traps, but they were not troubled. They just passed over them, floating on their blowguns. When they came to the four crossroads, they already knew the roads of Xibalba: the black road, the white road, the red road, and the blue-green road. Then they sent an insect named Mosquito. They sent him on ahead to obtain for them what he could hear. You shall bite each one of them in turn. Bite the first one seated there, and then keep on biting them until you have finished biting all of them. It will be truly yours then to suck the blood of people on the road, the mosquito was told. Very well then, said the mosquito. So then he went along the black road until he alighted behind the effigies of carved wood. The first ones were all dressed up. He bid the first one, but there was no response. Then he bid the second one seated there, but he did not speak either. Next, he bit the third one seated there, who was one death. Ouch, said each one when he was bitten. What, was their reply. Ow, said one death. What, one death? What is it? I am being bitten. It's just, ow! What was that? Now I am being bitten, said the fourth one seated there. What, seven death? What is it? I am being bitten. Next, the one seated fifth said, Ow! Ow! Flying Scab, asked Seven Death. What is it? I am being bitten, he said. Then the sixth one seated there was bitten. Ow! What? Gathered Blood. What is it? Asked Flying Scab. I am being bitten, he said. Next, the seventh one seated there was bitten. Ow! He said. What, Puzz Demon? What is it? Asked Gathered Blood. I am being bitten, he said. Then the eighth one seated there was bitten. Ow! He said. What, Jaundice Demon? What is it? Asked Puzz Demon. I am being bitten, he said. Then the ninth one seated there was bitten. Ow! He said. What, Bone Staff? What is it? Asked Jaundice Demon. I am being bitten, he said. Then the 10th one seated there was bitten. Ow! What, Skull Staff? What is it? Asked Bone Staff. I am being bitten, he said. Then the 11th one seated there was bitten. Ow! He said next. What, Wing? What is it? Asked Skull Staff. I am being bitten, he said. Next, the 12th one seated there was bitten. Ow! He said. What, Packstrap? What is it? Asked Wing. I am being bitten. Next was bitten the 13th one seated there. Ow! What, Bloody Teeth? What is it? Asked Packstrap. I am being bitten, he said. Then the 14th seated one was bitten. Ow! What, Bloody Claws? What is it? Asked Bloody Teeth. I am being bitten, he said. Thus their names were named. Each of them revealed the name of the other. Each of the individuals, in order of their rank, had his name revealed by the one who sat next to him. Not one of their names was missed until all of the names were named, when they were bitten by a hair that Hunahpu had plucked from the front of his knee. It wasn't really a mosquito that had bitten them, and so Hunahpu and Xbalanque heard the names of all of them. Thus they came to where the Xibalbans were. Hail these lords who are seated there, said a tempter. These are not lords. These are merely effigies carved of wood, they said. Then they hailed each one of them. Morning, One Death. Morning, Seven Death. Morning, Flying Scab. Morning, Gathered Blood. Morning, Pus Demon. Morning, Jaundice Demon. Morning, Bone Staff. Morning, Skull Staff. Morning, Wing. Morning, Packstrap. Morning, Bloody Teeth. Morning, Bloody Claws, they said when they arrived there. All of them had their faces revealed, for all of their names were named. Not one of their names was missed. When they were called upon, they gave the names of each one, without leaving any of them out. Sit down here, they were told, for it was desired that they sit on top of the bench. But they didn't want to. This isn't a bench for us. It is merely a heated stone, said Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Thus they were not defeated. Very well then, just go into that house, they were told. So then they entered into the house of darkness. But they were not defeated there either. In their hearts, the Xibalbans ordained that they would be defeated there in this, the first of the trials of Xibalba. Thus they entered first into the house of darkness. There the messenger of One Death gave to them a torch already burning, and a cigar for each of them. And the messenger said, when he arrived, Thus says the Lord, here is their torch. It must be given back at dawn along with the cigars. They must return them. Very well, they replied, but they didn't light the torch. They just placed the red tail feather of a macaw on it as a substitute for flame. Thus the night watchmen saw it as if it were burning. As for cigars, they just put fireflies on their tips. All night they would glow brilliantly because of them. We have defeated them, said the night watchman. But the torch was not used up, for it was only an illusion. Neither did the cigars have anything burning on them. It was merely an illusion as well. Thus they returned them whole to the lords. What becomes of them? Where did they come from? Who begat them? Who gave them birth? Truly our hearts are troubled, for it is not good what they are doing to us. Their appearance, as well as their nature, are unique, they said to one another. Then they summoned all the lords. Let us play ball, boys, they were told. But first they were questioned by One Death and Seven Death. Where did you really come from? Would you tell us, boys? They were asked by the Xibalbans. We must come from somewhere, but we don't know. Only this they said. They told them nothing. Very well then, we will just go and play ball, boys, the Xibalbans said to them. Fine, they replied. Here's a rubber ball that we will use, said the Xibalbans. No, we will use ours, said the boys. Not so, we will use this one that is ours, said again the Xibalbans. Very well, said the boys. It appears to be a skull, but it is merely drawn on the ball, said the Xibalbans. It is not. It is a skull, we tell you, said the boys. Not so, replied the Xibalbans. Very well then, said Hunahpu. Thus the Xibalbans threw down their rubber ball, which landed before the yoke of Hunahpu. And when the Xibalbans saw this, the white dagger came out of the rubber ball. It clashed about over the ground of the entire ball court, threatening the boys. What is that? Asked Hunahpu and Xbalanque. You just want death for us. Did we not answer your summons when your messenger came? Have pity on us. We will just go then, said the boys to them. It was their desire that the boys would straightway die there because of the blade. They were to have been defeated, but it was not so. It was the Xibalbans who were now defeated by the boys. Don't go, boys. We will just play with your ball, the boys were told. Very well then, they replied. Thus they took out their rubber ball, and it was thrown down. Then their prizes were chosen. What will we win? The Xibalbans asked. Surely it is your choice, the boy said. Our prize shall be merely 4 bowls of flowers, said the Xibalbans. Very well. What kinds of flowers? The boys asked the Xibalbans. 1 bowl of red petals, 1 bowl of white petals, 1 bowl of yellow petals, and 1 bowl of the large ones, said the Xibalbans. Very well, replied the boys. So then the ball was dropped into play. They were equal in strength, but the boys made many plays with the ball, for they played with all their hearts. At last, the boys gave themselves up to be defeated, and the Xibalbans thus rejoiced at their defeat. We have done well. We have already defeated them at their first attempt, said the Xibalbans. Where shall they go to get the flowers? They asked in their hearts. You will give to us the flowers as our prize early in the morning, the boys Hunahpu and Xbalanque were told by the Xibalbans. Very well, we will play ball again early in the morning, they said. Then they made their plans together. Thus the boys entered into Blade House, the second trial of Xibalba. Here it was desired that they would be sliced apart by the blades. They were to have died quickly in their hearts, but they did not die. They spoke to the blades, instructing them in this way. Yours shall be the flesh of animals, they said to the blades. Thus they stopped moving. As one, they all lowered the points of their blades, and while they were passing the night in Blade House, they called out to all the ants, Cutting ants, conquering ants, come, go and get flower blossoms as prizes for the lords. Very well, they said. Then the ants went to get flowers from the garden of 1 Death and 7 Death. Now the Xibalbans had previously instructed the guardians of their flowers. Look after our flowers with all vigilance. Do not allow them to be stolen, for by these we have defeated the boys. What if they were able to obtain these as our prize? Thus, do not sleep all night. Very well, they said then. But the guardians of the garden did not notice anything. They would just cry out aimlessly in the branches of the trees. They just toddled along through the garden, repeating their song. Spurpuwek, spurpuwek, said the one when he called. Puhuyu, puhuyu, said the other, the whippoorwill by name, when he called. These 2 were the guardians of the garden of 1 Death and 7 Death. They didn't notice the ants stealing that which they were guarding. They swarmed and thronged, carrying away the flowers. They went to cut down flowers from the tops of trees, gathering them together with those from below the trees. All this they did while the guardians were crying out, not noticing that their tails and wings were being gnawed on as well. The flowers were thus loosened until they fell down to be gathered up. The 4 bowls were thus quickly filled with their flowers. By dawn, they had all been collected. Then the messengers arrived to summon them. Come, says the Lord, may they straightway bring hither our prize, the boys were told. Very well, they answered, for they had collected the flowers into the 4 bowls. Thus they went, arriving before the lords. Now the lords received the flowers with woeful faces. Thus the Xibalbans were defeated. The boys had just sent ants, and in 1 night they had collected the flowers in the bowls. Thus the Xibalbans all turned pale. Their faces were pallid because of the flowers, and so they summoned the flower guardians. For what reason have you allowed our flowers to be stolen? These flowers that you see are ours, the guardians were told. We noticed nothing, O lords, "But our tails have surely suffered for it," they replied. Then their mouths were split open as punishment for allowing that which they were guarding to be stolen. Thus 1 death and 7 death were defeated by Hunahpu and Spelunky. And this is the reason why the mouths of whippoorwills gape wide open to this day. Then the ball was dropped into play again, but the game was even, and when they had finished playing ball, they planned together once more. "At dawn again," said the Xibalbans. "Very well," said the boys, when they had finished. Hunahpu and Spelunky in the House of Cold. And so they now entered the House of Cold. The cold here was immeasurable. The interior of the House of Cold was thick with hail, but straightway the boys caused the cold to dissipate. They did it in. They ruined and destroyed the cold. Thus they did not die, but rather were alive when it dawned again. The Xibalbans had wanted them to die there, but this was not to be. Instead, they were just fine when the dawn came. So then the guardians came again to summon them. "What is this? Haven't they died?" asked the lords of Xibalba. And again they marveled at the deeds of the boys, Hunahpu and Spelunky. Hunahpu and Spelunky in the House of Jaguars. Next, they entered into Jaguar House, which was crowded inside with jaguars. "Do not eat us. We will give you what is yours," the jaguars were told. Then they scattered bones before the beasts, who voraciously crunched them. The hearts of the night watchmen found this sweet, saying, "They are finished. They have given themselves up. They have eaten their hearts, and now these are their skeletons that are being gnawed upon." But they didn't die. They were just fine when they came out again from Jaguar House. "What kind of people are these? Where have they come from?" asked all the Xibalbans. Hunahpu and Spelunky in the House of Fire. Next, they went into the fire, for there was a house of fire. There was nothing but fire inside, but they were not burned. They were to have been roasted and set aflame. Instead, they were just fine when dawn came. It had been desired that they would straightway die when they passed through there, but it was not so. Thus, all the Xibalbans lost heart as a result. Hunahpu and Spelunky in the House of Bats. Next, they were put inside Bat House, which had only bats inside. It was a house of death bats. These were great beasts with snouts like blades that they used as murderous weapons. When they arrived there, they were to be finished off. They had to crawl inside their blowguns to sleep, so that they would not be eaten there in this house. Nevertheless, it was because of a single death bat that they gave themselves up in defeat. It came swooping down, but this was merely a way to manifest themselves when it occurred. Thus they pleaded for wisdom all that night as the bats made a din with their flapping wings. Kill it, they said all night long. At length things quieted a little, and the bats became motionless. Thus one of the boys crawled to the end of his blowgun. Spelunky said, "Hunahpu, do you see the dawn yet?" "I will go and see for certain if it has happened," he replied. Hunahpu truly wanted to look out of the mouth of his blowgun to see the dawn, but when he did so, his head was cut off by the death bat, leaving the greater part of his body behind. "What? Hasn't it dawned yet?" asked Spelunky. But Hunahpu did not move. "What is going on? Hunahpu wouldn't have left. What then has he done?" But nothing moved. Only the rustling of wings was heard. Thus Spelunky was ashamed. "Alas, we have given in already," he said. At the word of 1 death and 7 death, the head was placed atop the bulwark. Thus all the Xibalbans rejoiced because of the head of Hunahpu. Then Spelunky summoned all of the animals, the coati and the peccary, and all the animals both great and small, while it was still dark, early in the morning. He then entreated them for their food. I sent each of you to bring the food that belongs to you, said Spelunky to them. Very well, they said. Then they all went to obtain what was theirs. When they returned, they were many. One brought back rotten things, another brought leaves, another brought stones, and yet another brought dirt. Thus the animals, both small and great, each brought their various foods. Now, after many had come, the coati arrived last of all, bringing a chilacayote squash. She came rolling it along with her nose. This was to be transformed into the head of Hunahpu. Immediately its eyes were carved upon it. Numerous sages came down from the sky, for Heart of Sky, he who is Huracan, appeared here. He arrived here in Bat House, but the face wasn't completely successfully in time. Only its beautiful covering had appeared. It only had the ability to speak by the time the horizon of the sky began to redden, for it was about to dawn. Blacken it again with soot, old man, the possum was told. Fine, replied the grandfather, and he blackened the sky with soot until it was dark again. 4 times the grandfather blackened it with soot. Thus, today, people say, the possum blackens it with soot. Finally, the sky succeeded in turning red and then blue when it began its existence. Is it not good? Hunahpu was asked. Yes, it is good, he replied, for his head was well supported. It became just like a true head. Then they planned a deception. They took counsel together. Don't play ball. Just look threatening. I will surely be the one to accomplish it, said Spelunky to him. Then he instructed a rabbit. Be there at the head of the ball court, in the tomato patch. The rabbit was told by Spelunky. And when the rubber ball comes your way, hop away until I accomplish my task, the rabbit was told. Thus he was given his instructions there in the night. And when it dawned, the both of them were well. The head of Hunahpu is restored. So the ball was again dropped into play. The head of Hunahpu was first placed atop the ball court. We have already triumphed. You are finished. You gave in, so give up, they were told. But Hunahpu just called out. Strike the head as if it were a rubber ball, they were told. No harm will come to us now, for we are holding our own. Thus the lords of Xibalba threw down the ball, where it was met by Spelunky. The ball landed before his yoke and bounced away. It sailed clear over the ball court. It just bounced once, then twice, landing in the tomatoes. Then the rabbit came out, hopping along. All the Xibalbans thus went after him. The Xibalbans all went after the rabbit, shouting and rushing about. Thus the twins were able to retrieve the head of Hunahpu, replacing it where the chilacayote squash had been. They then placed the chilacayote squash on the ball court, while the true head of Hunahpu was his once more. Therefore they both rejoiced again. While the Xibalbans were out searching for their rubber ball, the twins retrieved it from the tomato patch. And when they had done so, they called out, Come on, we found a rubber ball, they said. Thus they were carrying the round ball when the Xibalbans returned. What was it that we saw? They asked. And so they began again to play ball, both teams making equal plays until at last Spelunky struck the chilacayote squash, strewing it all over the ball court. Thus its seeds were scattered before them. What is this that has been brought here? Where is he that brought it? Asked the Xibalbans. Thus the lords of Xibalba were defeated by Hunahpu and Spelunky. They had passed through great affliction, but despite everything that had been done to them, they did not die. The deaths of Hunahpu and Spelunky. This then is the memorial to the deaths of Hunahpu and Spelunky. We shall now tell it in memory of their death. What they had planned to do, they had done despite all the afflictions and misfortunes. Thus, they did not die in the trials of Xibalba. Neither were they defeated by all the ravenous beasts that lived there. And then they summoned 2 seers. Visionary persons they were. The names of these sages were Descended and Ascended. The lords of Xibalba may inquire of you concerning our death. They are even now putting together their thoughts on the matter, because we have not yet died. We have not been defeated. We confounded their trials, nor have the animals seized us. This, therefore, is the sign that is in our hearts. Heated stones will be the means by which our murder will be accomplished. Thus, when all Xibalba has gathered together to determine how to ensure our death, this shall be the idea that you will propose. If you are asked about our death when we are burned, this is what you shall tell them. You descended and you ascended. If they should speak to you about it, wouldn't it perhaps be good if we scatter their bones in the canyon? Then you are to say, this would not be good, for they would merely arise again to new life. Then they will say to you, perhaps it would be good to merely hang them in the top of a tree. You will then reply, certainly that would not be good, for you would see their faces before you. Then the 3rd time they will say, would it be a good thing if we merely scatter their bones in the course of the river? If then you are asked this, you will reply, it is good that they should die, and it would be good if their bones were ground upon the face of a stone, like finely ground maize flour. Each one of them should be ground separately. Then these should be scattered there in the course of the river. They should be sprinkled on the river that winds among the small and great mountains. This then is what you will say. Thus will be made manifest what we have said to you in council, said Hunahpu and Xbalanque. For when they had thus counseled them, they already knew of their death. The Xibalbans were even then putting together the great heated stones in the form of a pit oven, placing large hot coals within it. Then came the messengers of 1 death and 7 death to accompany them. The Lord said to us, may they come. Bring them so that they may see what we have cooked up for them. This is the word of the Lord unto you, boys, they were told. Very well, they replied. Thus they went quickly to the mouth of the pit oven. There the Xibalbans wanted to force them into playing with them. Let us jump over this our sweet drink. 4 times each of us will go across it, boys, they were told by 1 death. You cannot trick us with this. Do we not already know the means of our death, O lords? You shall surely see it, they said. Then they turned to face one another, spread out their arms, and together they went into the pit oven. Thus, both of them died there. Then all the Xibalbans rejoiced at this. They contentedly shouted and whistled. We have defeated them. None too soon have they given themselves up, they said. Then they summoned, descended, and ascended, with whom word had been left by the boys. And the Xibalbans divined of them what was to be done with their bones. Thus, according to their word, the bones were ground up and strewn along the course of the river. But they did not go far away. They just straightway sank there beneath the water. And when they appeared again, it was as chosen boys, for thus they had become. The resurrection of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. On the 5th day they appeared again. People saw them in the river, for the 2 of them appeared like people fish. Now, when their faces were seen by the Xibalbans, they made a search for them in the rivers. And on the very next day, they appeared again as 2 poor orphans. They wore rags in front and rags on their backs. Rags were thus all they had to cover themselves. But they did not act according to their appearance when they were seen by the Xibalbans. For they did the dance of the whippoorwill and the dance of the weasel. They danced the armadillo and the centipede. They danced the injury. For many marvels they did then. They set fire to a house as if it were truly burning. then immediately recreated it again as the Xibalbans watched with admiration. Then again they sacrificed themselves. One of them would die, surely throwing himself down in death. Then, having been killed, he would immediately be revived. And the Xibalbans simply watched them while they did it. Now all of this was merely the groundwork for the defeat of the Xibalbans at their hands. The summons of Hunahpu and Xbalanque before the lords. At length the news of their dances came to the ears of the lords 1 Death and 7 Death. And when they had heard of it, they said, "Who are these 2 poor orphans? Is it truly delightful? Is it true that their dancing and all that they do is beautiful?" For the lords were delighted with the account when they heard it. Thus they entreated their messengers to summon them to come. "Say this to them, may they come so that we may watch them, for we marvel at them," say the lords. Thus the messengers went to the dancers and repeated the words of the lords to them. "We don't want to, for in truth we are timid. We would be ashamed to enter into such a lordly house. Our faces are truly ugly, and our eyes are just wide in poverty. Don't they see that we are merely dancers? What then would we say to our fellow orphans? We have responsibilities. They also desire our dances, for they revive their faces with us. It is not right that we should do the same with the lords. Therefore, we do not want to do this, O messengers," said Hunahpu and Xbalanque. But they were pestered, threatened with misfortune and pain. And so they went with apprehension, for they didn't want to be going any too soon. Many times they had to be prodded because they just walked along slowly, making little progress, while the messengers who brought them led the way to the lords. Hunahpu and Xbalanque danced before the lords of Xibalba. At length they arrived before the lords. They pretended to be humble, prostrating themselves when they came. They humbled themselves, stooping over and bowing. They hid themselves with rags, giving the appearance that they were truly just poor orphans when they arrived. Then they were asked where their home mountain was and who their people were. They were also asked about their mother and their father. "Where do you come from?" they were asked. "We do not know, our Lord. Neither do we know the faces of our mother or our father. We were still small when they died," they just said. They didn't tell them anything. "Very well then, on with the spectacle." "What do you want us to give you as payment?" they were asked. "We don't want anything. Truly we are frightened," they said again to the Lord. "Do not be afraid or timid. Dance. First, you will do that dance in which you sacrifice yourselves. Then burn down my home. Do everything that you know. We would watch this, for it was the desire of our hearts that you be summoned. Because you are poor orphans, we will pay whatever you ask as your price," they were told. Thus they began their songs and their dances, and all the Xibalbans came until the place was overflowing with spectators. They danced everything. They danced the weasel, they danced the whippoorwill, they danced the armadillo. Then the Lord spoke to them. "Sacrifice my dog, then revive him again," they were told. "All right," they replied. So they sacrificed his dog, and then revived him once more. The dog was truly happy when they revived him. He vigorously wagged his tail when they brought him back to life. Then the Lord spoke again to them. "Now you must surely burn my home," they were told. So then they burned the home of the Lord. The house was overflowing with all the lords, yet none were burned. Immediately it was restored again. Thus the home of 1 Death was not lost after all. All the lords marveled, therefore, and greatly rejoiced at their dances. The Lord thus spoke again to them. "Now kill a person, sacrifice him, but not so that he really dies," they were told. "Very well," they said. So they grabbed a person and sacrificed him. They extracted the heart of one of them and placed it before the lords. Now 1 Death and 7 Death marveled at this, for immediately that person was revived again by them. When he had been revived, his heart greatly rejoiced. And again the lords marveled at it. Now sacrifice yourselves. We would see this. Truly it is the desire of our hearts that you dance. Said again the lords. Very well then, O Lord, they replied. So then they sacrificed themselves. Hunahpu was sacrificed by Xibalba. Each of his legs and arms was severed. His head was cut off and placed far away. His heart was dug out and placed on a leaf. Now all these lords of Xibalba were drunk at the sight, as Xibalba went on dancing. Arise, he said, and immediately he was brought back to life again. Now the lords rejoiced greatly. 1 Death and 7 Death rejoiced, as if they were the ones doing it. They were so involved that it was as if they themselves were dancing. The defeat of the lords of Xibalba. For it was the desire of the lords to abandon their hearts to the dances of Hunahpu and Xibalba. Then came the words of 1 Death and 7 Death. Do it to us, sacrifice us, they said. Sacrifice us in the same way, said 1 Death and 7 Death, to Hunahpu and Xibalba. Very well then, surely you will be revived. Are you not Death? For we are here to gladden you, O lords, along with your vassals and your servants. They said therefore to the lords. The first to be sacrificed was the very head of all the lords, 1 Death by name, the lord of Xibalba. He was dead then, this 1 Death. Next, they grabbed 7 Death, but they didn't revive them. Thus the Xibalbans took to their heels when they saw that their lords had died. Their hearts were now taken from their chests. Both of them had been torn open as punishment for what they had done. Straightway the one lord was executed and not revived. The other lord had then begged humbly, weeping before the dancers. He would not accept it, for he had become disoriented. Take pity on me, he said in his regret. Then all of their vassals and servants fled into the great canyon. They packed themselves into the great ravine until they were piled up one on top of the other. Then innumerable ants swarmed into the canyon as if they had been driven there. And when the ants came, the Xibalbans all bowed themselves down, giving themselves up. They approached, begging humbly and weeping, for the lords of Xibalba were defeated. It was just a miracle, for the boys had transformed themselves before them, and then they declared their names. They revealed their names before all Xibalba. The miraculous maze of Hunahpu and Xibalba. Here are names. We shall now declare them. We shall also declare the names of our fathers to you. We are they whose names are Hunahpu and Xibalba. Our fathers are they who you killed, 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu by name. We are the avengers of the misfortune and affliction of our fathers. For this reason, we have endured all the tribulations that you have caused us. Thus, we shall now destroy you all. We will kill you. For none among you shall now be saved, they were told. Then all Xibalba begged humbly, weeping, Take pity on us, you Hunahpu and Xibalba. Truly we have wronged your fathers that you have named. They who are buried at crushing Bulcourt, they said. Very well. Here then is our word that we declare to you. Hearken, all you of Xibalba, for never again will you or your posterity be great. Your offerings also will never again be great. They will henceforth be reduced to croton sap. No longer will clean blood be yours. Unto you will be given only worn-out griddles and pots, only flimsy and brittle things. You shall surely eat only the creatures of the grass and the creatures of the wastelands. No longer will you be given the children of the light, those begotten in the light. Only things of no importance will fall before you. Only the sinner and the malevolent, the wretch and the molester, who clearly have sinned, will be given to you. No longer will you be able to seize suddenly just any person. You will be called upon only over the sap of the croton, they were told, all they of Xibalba. Thus began their devastation, the ruin of their being called upon in worship. Their glory was not great in the past, for they wanted only conflict with the people of ancient times. Surely they were not true gods. Their names merely inspired fear, for their faces were evil. They were strife makers, traitors, and tempters to sin and violence. They were also masters of deception, of the black view and the white view. They were called masters of harm and vexation. Fundamentally, their faces were hidden. Thus, their greatness and glory were destroyed. Never again would their dominion become great. This was the accomplishment of Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Now at the same time, the grandmother was weeping, crying out before the ears of unripe maize that had been left planted. They had sprouted, but then they dried up when they were burnt in the pit oven. Then the ears of maize had sprouted once again, and the grandmother had burnt copal incense before them as a memorial. The heart of their grandmother rejoiced when the maize sprouted a second time. Thus they were deified by their grandmother. She named it Center House, Center Ancestral Plot, Revitalized Maize, and Leveled Earth. She named it Center House and Center Harvest, for it was in the very center of the interior of their home where they had planted the ears of maize. She named it Leveled Earth and Revitalized Maize, for it was upon level ground that the ears of maize had planted. She named it Revitalized Maize because the maize had sprouted again. These names were given by Shmukin to what Hunahpu and Xbalanque had left planted. This was a memorial to them by their grandmother. Now their fathers, 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, had died long ago. They now went, therefore, to see them. Their father spoke to them when Xibalba was defeated. There are a few themes that I would like to discuss now that we have read the story of the hero twins. Let's start with the nature of Xibalba. Xibalba is the underworld. It is not to be confused with hell, which is a Christian concept. You should not use in your papers on when you are writing exclusively on Mesoamerica, specifically in this case on the Maya, you should stay away from words like heaven, hell, soul, resurrection, things like that. Perhaps the vocabulary should be exactly what the Maya are saying. Xibalba. It is the place of death as the underworld. What is that place like? That place is full of gods, right? They have some sort of hierarchy within the gods there. And the gods are associated with words, their names literally include the words blood, pus, which is one feature of infection, right? Bones, jaundice, which is a disease in which your skin becomes yellow, is not a good condition, stabbing. So that's just the names, right? And then the other thing is that they're watching over humans. For example, because the text itself says, these then are the Lord's pus demon and jaundice demon. Their dominion is to swell people up until pus oozes from the skin of their legs, and the skin of their faces becomes yellow with jaundice, as it is said. Thus, this is a dominion of pus demon and jaundice demon. And then the list continues. There's so many lords in Xibalba. Lord's bone staff, skull staff, staff bearers, and they said their staffs are merely bones. So consequently, Xibalba is a place of disease, if you will. But just like many things about the Maya, it is not a black and white thing. Because remember that later in the text, when the first set of twins arrive in Xibalba, they just don't know what to do because they've never had that experience. And then so maybe one of the lessons is that you learn from your ancestors, you learn from your parents and your grandparents. The tribulations they go through, you look at it and you learn. And in the story, the first set of twins, 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, they go to Xibalba. And why do they go to Xibalba? They go to Xibalba because they were playing ball. They were at the ball court. They were ball players. And the text says, when they gathered together to play in the ball court, the falcon would arrive to watch over them. So that's foreboding. That's scary.
This falcon was the messenger of Huracan, youngest thunderbolt and sudden thunderbolt. The face of the earth was not far for him. So he was close to the earth. He's watching over humans. Nor was Xibalba far for him. And also Xibalba is close. So he has dominion over the earth and Xibalba. In an instant, he could return again to the sky with Huracan. Notice that they said sky, not heaven. But the other interesting thing about Xibalba is that it is a place of death, of deceit. Remember that as soon as 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu, the first set of twins, go in there, the first set of twins that go to Xibalba, when they are in there, they are giving a torch and a cigar. And then they are given a warning. And they said, you have to return this intact at the end of your journey. Well, how can they do that? So they're playing trickery, right? The very first thing that happens is that they are asked to sit down on a bench. And you may think that that is a welcoming gesture. However, the bench was really hot and they burned their behinds. The hero twins burned their behind. And the lords of Xibalba were roaring with laughter about that. And then they go through many trials, and there's rivers of blood, there's rivers of pus, there's cold. With regards to the cigars and the torch, they said, thus 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu entered into the house of darkness. At length, one came to give them their torch, which was already lit. It had been sent by 1 Death and 7 Death, along with cigars for each of them, which had also already been lit. Notice that 1 and 7 also is like a mirror image of the hero twins versus the lords of death, right? And then the text continues. These then were sent by the lords to 1 Hunahpu and 7 Hunahpu. They were seated cross-legged there in the darkness when the courier arrived to give to them their torch and their cigars. The torch was brightly burning when it arrived, and with it were lit each one of the cigars. And then they were told, these are to be returned at dawn. They are not to be used up. Instead, they are to be collected again intact. Thus say the lords to you, they were told. And you're thinking to yourself, well, why didn't you tell me that before, right? Before you lit them? Or why can they have agency over when the cigar and the torch are lit? And then when that is extinguished, they will be defeated, meaning there will be death. And then the text goes, therefore they were defeated, for they used up the torch as well as the cigars that had been given to them. But of course, it's a game they cannot win, right? And then they go through a house of darkness, shivering house, which was full of frost. There's howling wind in there. There's also a jaguar house where there's jaguars that they bare their teeth. There's a bat house. And they actually make it really scary because they said the bats are captive bats and cannot come out. So they fly about and they shriek and fly about in that house, and you have to go through that. And then the 5th one is Blade House. And then they say there's just so many trials in Xibalba. And then at the end of all those trials and tribulations, the hero twins are asked. The hero twins are asked to return the cigar and the torch. And they said, we finished them off, O Lord. Very well then. Now your day is at an end. You are to die. Thus they were lost. They were broken as well. Here your faces shall be hidden, for you are to be sacrificed, said 1 Death and 7 Death. So they're also treating these deaths as sacrifices, right? And they were sacrificed and buried at a place named Crushing Bulcourt. But then Xibalba is also a place of rebirth, isn't it? Because 1 Hunahpu's head is thrown into a calabash tree, and then it miraculously begins to give fruit. So they threw the head on a tree, and he became alive. And then the lords of Xibalba spoke to one another, the text says, let no one cut the fruit, nor enter beneath the tree, they said. And it became identical to the other fruit on the tree that he gave. And then Lady Blood, a young woman, the daughter of the name of her father is Gathered Blood, was very attracted to the head of 1 Hunahpu. And she was saying that she desires of that fruit. And then 1 Hunahpu said, what do you want with a skull? I'm nothing but a skull. He goes, in the text he says, what is it that you desire of this? It is merely a skull, a round thing placed in the branches of trees, said the head of Hunahpu when he spoke to the maiden. You do not desire it, she was told. But I do desire it, said the maiden. Very well then, stretch out hither your right hand, so that I may see it, said the skull. Very well, said the maiden. And then the text says that he spit on her hand, and then she became pregnant. So the imagery is very clear because semen is what gets maidens pregnant. And so she's pregnant and she's carrying twins.
and she was going to be sacrificed by the lords of Xibalba, but she was able to convince the people who were going to sacrifice her to let her go and to instead to get fruit from the croton tree sap. Now this is interesting because the messengers who were going to sacrifice Lady Blood, the maiden from Xibalba who got pregnant, they accepted not killing her and instead take to the lords of Xibalba. Instead of sacrificing her, they took secretions from the croton tree, right? And it's interesting that instead of blood, the messengers who were told to kill Lady Blood offer the lords of Xibalba croton tree sap. And what's interesting here, look what it says in the text. They ask her, what are we going to give as a substitute for your heart to the lords of Xibalba? And she says, very well, the heart will not be theirs. At the same time, your homes will no longer be here. No longer will you lure people by force to their deaths. Only the true fornicator will be the subject to 1 death and 7 death. Mere croton tree sap will be theirs henceforth. Thus be it so. It will be this that you shall burn before their faces. It will not be this, the heart, that you will burn before their faces. Thus be it so. Take what the tree produces, said the maiden. So it's incredible. Are they saying that they're not going to be sacrificing anymore? And also, when the croton tree sap is offered to the lords of Xibalba, the text says, then he lifted it up with his fingers, dripping with blood from its surface. It was bright red with blood. Stir well the face of the fire and place it over the fire, said one death. Then they dried it over the fire, while the Xibalbans savored its fragrance. They all rose up to lean over it, for truly delicious was the smell of the blood to them. I don't know, it sounds to me, for those of us growing in Mesoamerica, in Central America, it sounds like they're eating morongas or something, or blood sausage, but vegan in this case. So I don't know what you make of this. It's interesting that the issue of Xibalba or death comes up when the hero twins play ball, isn't it? And then part of Xibalba, also falcon or birds of prey. And falcon are some of the fastest birds. These could fly long distances and prey from a great height. So why does death occur? Death occur, according to the Popol Vuh, because humans make a lot of noise, especially when they play the ball game. And that's really interesting because, to me, I've always interpreted that to be that being alive means that we are very busy and we are noisy. And then playing the ball game must have been one noisy thing that the Maya did. And the Lord say in the text, they must come to Xibalba to play ball so we can be invigorated. So that means that the Death Lords become invigorated when they defeat humans, the Maya. And they really wanted to take their rubber ball and all the paraphernalia that they used for playing the ball game. So consequently, Xibalba is filled with traps, challenges, and trials. And these trials are designed to humiliate and destroy those who enter Xibalba. It's a dangerous place. It's dark and associated with sickness, suffering, and deceit. And so the first set of twins to enter Xibalba are tricked and defeated. So ultimately they are killed. So death comes, according to the Popol Vuh, according to what I can see from the Popol Vuh, and I wonder what you would think about other imagery, is that death comes because the lords of Xibalba are treacherous and humans don't know, and so they lose their game. They lose the game to the lords of Xibalba, and so they are defeated because they don't know what awaits them or how to behave. But interestingly, the Popol Vuh also gives us an interesting twist with Lady Blood. She's the daughter of one of the lords of Xibalba, and she has relations with one Hunahpu, the head on the calabash tree. She becomes pregnant. She convinces the messengers of the Lords of Death not to kill her. And what she does is she goes to Earth, to the house of the grandmother of the hero twins. And she says that she's pregnant with her grandson. The grandmother does not believe her and wants proof. And the proof that she sends is that the grandmother says, very well then, I hear you that you are my daughter-in-law, the maiden was told. Go then to get food that these may eat, because she has another set of twins in the house already. Go and harvest a great netful of maize and return with it. Then you will surely be my daughter-in-law, just as you have said. Very well, she replied. Then she went to the maize field. But then when she got to the maize field, she only found a single ear of maize. And the maiden became very upset. But then she began to do something. She called upon the guardians of the food. And then the maize multiplied, the corn multiplied there. And then she went back to the grandmother's house and she had a net full of maize. And then the grandmother said, "Where did you come by this food? From where was it stolen? I will surely go to see if you have finished off the maize plant and brought it all here," said the grandmother. Thus she went in to see the maize plant, but there was a single ear of maize still on the maize plant, and it was clear where the net had been placed beneath it. The grandmother thus rushed back to her home and said to the maiden, "This is but a sign that you are in truth my daughter-in-law. I will surely watch your deeds, for they that are to be my grandchildren are enchanted already," the maiden was told. And remember that when the grandmother was really sad that the set of twins was going to Xibalba, so then the text says that Lady Blood had the two babies and they were Hunahpu and Xbalanque, and then they discovered the gaming things that were hidden in the house and they took it out and started playing ball. And then the story repeats itself because the lords of Xibalba hear the second set of twins playing and then they are summoned to Xibalba. And then this time around the grandmother is weeping again. She's so upset. And then the hero twins, to console her, say, "Surely we must go, our grandmother, but first we will advise you. This is the sign of our word that we will leave behind. Each of us shall first plant an ear of unripe maize in the center of the house. If they dry up, this is a sign of our death. They have died, you will say, when they dry up. If then they sprout again, they are alive, you will say, our grandmother and our mother. This is the sign of our word that is left with you," they said. Thus, Hunahpu planted one, and Xbalanque planted another in the house. They did not plant them in the mountains or in fertile ground. It was merely in dry ground, in the middle of the interior of their home, that they planted them. Then they left, each with his blowgun, and descended to Xibalba. And so, however, this time around, the second set of twins are not easily deceived by the lords of Xibalba. Au contraire, it is the second set of twins that trick the lords of Xibalba. And then the text says that, therefore, Hunahpu and Xbalanque defeated the lords of Xibalba. And in fact, according to the text, Hunahpu and Xbalanque were able to revive people, bring them back from the dead. And it's a trick that they learned. So the second set of twins are outsmart the gods at their own games. And because they had been learning so much, the twins allow themselves to be killed, but then they revive themselves. They pass as tricksters, right? They do a sort of performance. And the lords of Xibalba are delighted by it. And they're saying, "Oh, all right, kill our dog." And then they kill the dog. And then they said, "Now revive him." And then the hero twins revive the dog. And it's very, very cute when the text says that the little dog was wagging his tail. And then the lords of death say, why don't you kill us and then revive us? And they did. The hero twins kill the lords of Xibalba, but then they don't make them come back again. So then the text says that the lords of death or the lords of Xibalba are defeated. So now it's a little bit like the hero twins wield power over death. And it's interesting that they are linking their own lives with the cycle of the maize plant. And I wonder if this is sort of like linking the human cycle of life with the maize plant, because the maize plant is an annual. An annual is a plant that has its life cycle in 1 year. It's an annual. So it is born, grows, gives fruit, and then dies. And then the next year, out of its own fruit, appears more maize plants, another maize plant. And so it's interesting that maybe this defeat over death and the lords of Xibalba has to do with the fact that humans can actually be born again, just like the maize plant. So the symbolism of revival is that the hero twins' death and rebirth mirror the natural cycles of the world, particularly agricultural ones, right? Their story reflects how the way crops die when harvested, but return through seeds and regrowth. And then the story also implies that true power comes not from avoiding death, but from understanding and transcending it. The hero twins' revival, or the coming back from the dead, represents wisdom and transformation, and the ability to navigate between worlds, maybe,
but definitely the ability to engage with the lords of death and beat them at their own game sometimes. And this actually reminds me a little bit about the Day of the Dead, a very unique holiday in Mexico to this day, in modern times, in which death is not celebrated, but death is actually told, you do not exist today. During our celebration, death does not exist, and we are able to remember and engage with our departed ones as though you do not exist. So the story of the hero twins, their saga, is deeply symbolic of the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, right? The rebirth of the hero twins could be a metaphor for renewal, fertility, or sometimes even the movement of celestial bodies, which many scholars interpret the hero twins as representations of celestial bodies. They descend into Xibalba. Their descent into Xibalba is likened to the setting of the sun, while their rebirth parallels the sunrise, symbolizing the daily renewal of life. And that's very similar to what I was saying about the maize plant.